The desert sun burned high over the Arizona Territory in 1876, turning the land into a mirage of dust and heat. The air shimmered like glass, and the only movement across the wide plains was a single rider, Taza, a young Apache warrior, the son of a once great chief. He was lean, quiet, and scarred by years of running and fighting to survive after the U.S. Army had driven his people from their homeland. Taza's tribe had been broken apart. The elders spoke of a time when the Apache roamed freely, following the rivers and hunting without fear. But now those days were ghosts. Soldiers patrolled every trail, and bounties were hung for Apache scalps. Taza had been living alone for weeks, scouting for signs of his brother, who had been taken captive near Fort Stanton. That morning, as he rode through a narrow canyon lined with red rock, he heard something strange and a faint cry, weak but human. He stopped, hand on his rifle, and listened again. The cry came from beyond a cluster of rocks. Moving carefully, Taza dismounted, crept forward, and saw her. A white woman lay half buried in the dust, her dress torn and blood-soaked. A broken wagon wheel nearby told part of the story, an ambush perhaps. Her hair was tangled, her lips cracked from thirst, and a long black arrow was lodged deep in her side. When she saw him, fear flashed in her eyes. "Please," she whispered, her voice rough and dry. "Don't kill me." Taza knelt beside her, his expression unreadable. He saw she was young, maybe 20, and carried no weapon. The arrow was not Apache-made. It had feathers painted blue, a mark of the Navajo. He tore a strip from his own cloth and poured water from his canteen onto her lips. She coughed, gasped, then spoke again. "Please, don't pull it," she said, her hand clutching the shaft of the arrow. "If you do, I'll die faster." Taza hesitated. He had seen wounds like that before. Sometimes the arrow was the only thing holding the bleeding back. But his instinct as a warrior told him he couldn't leave it inside. Blood was seeping already. He told her in broken English, "Arrow bad. Must take out." She shook her head violently. "No, please, don't pull it." But Taza had already gripped the shaft. He pulled steady and quick. The arrow slid free, coated in dark blood, and instantly a deep stream flowed from her wound. The woman cried out in pain, her body arching before collapsing against him. Taza pressed his hands hard against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. His blood ran cold, not from fear, but from realization. He had done what she begged him not to do, and now he might have killed her. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. "Name," she whispered. "Elena," he nodded. "Taza." The name lingered between them for a moment, two strangers from different worlds bound by a mistake. Taza stayed with her through the heat of the afternoon, forcing her to drink water, packing herbs against the wound. He could feel her pulse weaken beneath his fingers, but she clung to life stubbornly. As the sun began to fall, Taza noticed something else, horse tracks in the sand, fresh and heavy. Soldiers, they were close, maybe following the same trail that had led him here. He faced a choice: leave her and save himself, or take her and risk capture. The Apache had no reason to help a white settler woman, not after what her people had done to his tribe. But something in her eyes reminded him of his sister, the one who died during the army raid years ago. He tied her gently onto his horse, secured her wound again, and started toward the hills. He knew caves nearby where they could hide for the night. As he rode, the wind carried the distant echo of hoofbeats, the cavalry's patrols sweeping through the canyon. That night, under the cold desert moon, Taza built a small fire inside a rocky hollow. He gave Elena more water and crushed mesquite bark to place over her wound. She woke briefly, eyes glassy with pain. "You should have left me," she whispered. He didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on the fire, his thoughts far away. On his father's words, "Even enemies can bleed the same." When dawn came, Taza heard the faint bugle call of the army echoing across the plains. The soldiers were close. He knew if they found them together, they'd shoot him on sight. He looked down at Elena, pale and barely breathing, and realized the decision he made yesterday, pulling that arrow, had tied his fate to hers. Whether she lived or died, their destinies were now one, and somewhere deep in his chest, beneath the cold rush of guilt, Taza felt something unfamiliar, the stir of duty, not to tribe or revenge, but to a life he had almost ended. Morning broke over the desert in streaks of orange and silver. The cold of the night was giving way to the dry heat of the sun. Inside the narrow cave, Taza stirred the dying embers of the fire and listened. The sound of distant hoofbeats still echoed faintly in the canyon below. The U.S. cavalry was moving fast. Elena lay motionless on a blanket made from Taza's saddlecloth. Her wound was still bleeding lightly, but the herbs and pressure had slowed it. Her breathing was shallow yet steady. The black arrowhead he had pulled from her side lay beside the fire, a small, deadly piece of iron that had changed everything. Taza knew that if he stayed, both of them would die. The soldiers hunted Apaches like coyotes, and any white woman found with one would be assumed kidnapped or dead by his hand. But if he left her now, the desert would finish what the arrow had started. As he packed his horse, Elena woke, her eyes glazed and frightened. "Where are you taking me?" she asked weakly. "North," Taza answered. "To the river. You live if you reach water." Her brow furrowed. "Why would you help me?" He didn't answer immediately. His gaze moved to the horizon, a line of mountains where the sky met stone. "Because I pulled the arrow," he said simply. "My hand did wrong. Now I make right." For a long time she said nothing. Then she whispered, "You didn't shoot it?" "No," he agreed quietly. "But I pulled it." They began their slow journey north through the canyon. Taza walked beside the horse, leading it carefully over rocks and brush. The sun climbed higher, turning the land white with heat. Every so often Elena drifted into unconsciousness, her lips murmuring words Taza didn't understand. As they moved, Taza's mind churned with memories. He thought of his brother Nantan, captured months ago by the cavalry. They said the army had taken him to Fort Stanton to teach him civilization. But Taza knew what that meant. Chains, humiliation, and labor. Every mile north brought him closer to the river, but also closer to the fort. He had to choose. Abandon Elena to save his brother or keep his promise to help her and lose his only family forever. That afternoon they rested under a rock ledge. Taza gave Elena the last of his water and chewed mesquite pods to keep his own hunger quiet. She looked at him then, studying his face, the sharp cheekbones, the faint scars across his jaw. "My father was a soldier," she said suddenly. "He came out here to keep the peace. He believed the Apache were savages." Taza didn't flinch, but his eyes darkened. "And what you believe?" She hesitated, her voice trembling. "I don't know anymore." The honesty in her words caught him off guard. For a long while they sat in silence, broken only by the whisper of wind through the rocks. Then faintly a sound, gunfire. Not close but not far either. Taza stood instantly. "Soldiers," he said. "They follow us." He doused the small fire and helped her back onto the horse. Every muscle in his body was alert now. They moved quickly through the ravine, following the dry riverbed that curved eastward. Dust clouds rose in the distance, riders closing in. By sunset, they reached a small creek, the first running water they'd seen in days. Elena could barely sit upright. Taza carried her off the horse and laid her beside the stream. The light shimmered off her pale face and he saw she was fading. "You go," she whispered, gripping his wrist weakly. "They'll kill you for helping me." He shook his head. "Apache does not leave one dying." Tears welled in her eyes, but she managed a faint smile. "My father used to say, 'There's no mercy in this land.' Maybe he was wrong." Taza looked away, his jaw tight. In that moment, he realized the weight of his choice. Not just to save her life, but to defy everything the world expected of him. To the soldiers, he was the enemy. To his people, he was a fool for risking himself for a settler woman. But to himself, he was simply a man trying to make peace with his own mistake. Night fell again. The stars came out sharp and cold. Taza built no fire this time. The soldiers would see the smoke. As Elena slept, he sat awake, his rifle across his knees, watching the horizon. He knew what was coming. The cavalry would not stop. If they found her alive with him, they'd hang him before sunrise. If she died, he'd be hunted for murder. There was only one way to end it. Reach Fort Stanton, bring her to the surgeon, and surrender. It was madness. But he had no other road left. Before dawn, he packed what little they had and whispered to his horse. "We go to the fort," he said. "For her. For my blood." When Elena woke, the first light of morning painted the sky gold. She saw his face, determined yet calm, and understood. "You're risking everything," she said softly. He nodded. Maybe everything must be risked, so one thing can be saved. As they rode toward the fort, Taza felt the land around him change. From wild canyon to open prairie, the edge of civilization. He could already see smoke in the distance where soldiers' fires burned. The choice had been made. Whatever awaited him there, prison, death, or redemption, he would face it. Because in that harsh and divided land, a single act of mercy might yet mean something. The trail to Fort Stanton was long, dry, and full of ghosts. Every stretch of land seemed to hold memory. Burned camps, broken wagons, shallow graves half covered by sand. The wind blew hot from the south, carrying with it the faint smell of gunpowder and death. Taza led his horse along a narrow ridge, keeping low. Elena rode slumped in the saddle, her wound wrapped tight beneath layers of cloth. Her skin had gone pale as chalk, but she clung stubbornly to life. Each mile was a test. They passed through scorched valleys where the grass had been trampled by soldiers' boots and saw buzzards circling in the distance. Water was scarce. The few streams they found were muddy or poisoned by runoff from camps. By the third day, Elena could barely whisper. Her fever had returned and the bandages were soaked with blood. Taza knew they were running out of time. He had one thought left. If he could reach the mission near the fort, a priest or doctor might take pity. But to get there, he'd have to cross open plains where cavalry patrols rode daily. That night, under a blanket of stars, he set camp by an old cottonwood tree. The moonlight cast long shadows across the sand. Elena stirred, her eyes glassy. "Taza," she murmured, barely audible. "If I don't make it, don't let them hang you." He frowned, tightening the blanket around her shoulders. "You live. You strong," she smiled faintly. "You don't know me. I've never been strong." Taza sat quietly for a long while, listening to the wind rustle through the dry branches. "In my people's way," he said finally. "A warrior's heart is not in his arm but in his spirit. You still fight, so you are strong." She looked at him then, really looked. Not as an enemy, not as an Indian, but as a man who carried more pain than pride. "Why do they hate you?" she asked softly. Taza didn't answer at first. Then he said, "They fear what they don't understand. We live with the land. They want to own it. Between those things there can be no peace." A long silence followed. Then quietly Elena said, "My father used to say the same. About your people." He glanced at her, surprised. "Your father?" She nodded weakly. "Before he joined the cavalry. Before the war made him hard. He told me once, the land belongs to no man. But men will kill to claim it anyway." Taza's expression softened. "He was wise man." She laughed faintly, a dry, broken sound. "He was once." By dawn, Taza had made his decision. He couldn't go directly to the fort and the risk was too high. But there was an old trading post about 8 miles west, run by a man named Samuel Cutter, who'd once traded horses with the Apache before the war. If anyone could give them shelter, it would be him. The sun rose burning red as they started west. Elena drifted in and out of consciousness. Twice Taza had to stop and hold her upright in the saddle. By mid-afternoon, dust clouds appeared on the horizon. Riders. He ducked behind a ridge, pulling the horse with him. Through his spyglass and a cracked, battered piece he'd taken from a fallen scout, he saw blue uniforms. Cavalry. They were moving slow, searching. Taza waited until they passed, then turned the horse toward the rocks. Every second counted now. By sunset, they reached the remains of the trading post. It was smaller than he remembered. Half burned, the roof caved in, walls marked by bullet holes. "Cutter," Taza called softly in English. "It is Taza. I come for help." For a moment, nothing stirred. Then from the shadows, an old man emerged, holding a shotgun. His beard was gray, his face weathered by sand and time. "Lord Almighty," he muttered when he saw Elena. "What in hell happened to her?" "Arrow," Taza said. "Need water, bandages." Cutter hesitated, then nodded. "Inside, quick." He led them into the half-ruined post. The air inside smelled of smoke and whiskey. Cutter fetched a jug of clean water and strips of cloth. As Taza cleaned the wound again, Cutter watched him closely. "You're a fool for bringing her here," the old trader said. "Army's been sniffing round these hills all week. They see you with her, you're a dead man." Taza didn't look up. "Then I die helping." Cutter shook his head. "Ain't no honor in dying for a lost cause." Elena stirred weakly, her voice faint. "He's not dying for a cause," she whispered. "He's dying for me." The room went silent. Cutter looked from her to Taza and back again, then sighed heavily. You always were a stubborn one, Apache. Fine. You can stay the night. But come dawn, you'd best be gone. I can't have soldiers hanging me for helping you. That night, Taza kept watch again while Elena slept on a cot by the wall. He listened to the faint creaks of the building, to the lonely howl of a coyote outside. His heart was heavy. He had come this far, yet the fort was still 2 days away. Near midnight, Cutter came to sit beside him. You still got that brother in Stanton? He asked quietly. Taza nodded. I will find him. When she's safe, Cutter spat into the dirt. You ain't gonna make it to Stanton with the cavalry all over the trail. But, he paused, then leaned in. There's another way. A back road through Devil's Pass, dangerous as hell, but quiet. No soldiers go there, Taza nodded slowly. Then we take that road. Cutter gave him a long look. You sure you want to risk it? Taza's eyes were firm. Already risked everything. One more road changes nothing. By dawn, the plan was set. They would ride through Devil's Pass, the forbidden canyon the soldiers feared. A route steep, narrow, and haunted by memories of old Apache battles. Taza saddled the horse again as the first light broke across the sky. He turned once toward Cutter. Thank you, he said. The old trader grunted. Don't thank me yet. You still got a long road to hell before you see that fort. As Taza rode off with Elena, the wind carried Cutter's words across the plain. A warning, a prophecy, and perhaps a truth Taza already knew. In the west, mercy could cost more than blood. The wind that swept through Devil's Pass was dry and mean, whispering through the rocks like a warning. The canyon walls rose high and narrow, painted in streaks of rust and gold. To most travelers, it was a cursed road, steep, treacherous, and haunted by the memory of massacres long past. But for Taza, it was the only path left between life and death. He guided the horse slowly through the narrow ravine, his eyes always scanning the cliffs. Elena was slumped in the saddle, barely conscious. The wound on her side had turned dark around the edges, the fever rising again. Each breath she took was a small battle. They had been riding since dawn. The trail twisted and climbed sharply between boulders, until it leveled into a narrow plateau overlooking the desert below. From there, Taza could see faint smoke columns in the distance. The army patrols were still searching. He stopped the horse, letting it rest. Elena stirred weakly. Where are we? She murmured. Between life and death, Taza said quietly. She smiled faintly at his words, though her eyes were dim. You talk like an old man. Desert makes all men old, he said, managing the faintest smile in return. They rested briefly beneath a rock ledge. Taza gave her a sip of water, the last of it, then looked at the sun overhead. He knew they couldn't go much farther without supplies. Yet to turn back was to die. As the afternoon stretched, they continued the climb. Around every bend, the wind carried faint echoes, no hooves, gunfire, or maybe just the ghosts of memory. Once Taza thought he saw movement high on the ridge, a glint of metal. His instincts flared. Danger. Hold tight, he told Elena, spurring the horse forward. Moments later, a rifle cracked. A bullet struck the rock beside them, spraying dust. Another followed. He kicked the horse hard, guiding it into a run along the narrow path. More shots echoed. Sharp, metallic, bandits. Outlaws who haunted the pass, scavenging travelers foolish enough to cross it. Taza ducked low, firing once from his rifle. The echo thundered through the canyon. He saw a figure drop behind a boulder. There were at least 3 of them. He guided the horse behind a sharp curve and dismounted, pulling Elena down with him. Stay low, he said. She nodded weakly, clutching the reins. Taza crept forward along the ridge, rifle ready. The world narrowed to the sound of his heartbeat and the crunch of gravel underfoot. A shadow moved on the rocks above, a man aiming down. Taza fired first. The shot struck true. The man fell, tumbling down the slope. Another shout came from the ridge. Gunfire roared again. Dust and smoke filled the air. In the chaos, Elena screamed. The horse had bolted, startled by the noise. Taza turned back, running toward her. One of the bandits had come around the corner, aiming his revolver. Without thinking, Taza charged him. They collided hard, wrestling in the dirt. The man was bigger, stronger, but Taza was faster. He slammed the rifle butt into the bandit's face once, twice, until the man went limp. His hands were shaking, his chest heaving, but the fight was over. When he returned to Elena, she was on the ground, breathing heavily, the wound reopened. He tore fresh cloth and pressed it to her side, his hands trembling. "You should have left me," she whispered again, tears forming. "You'll die out here." Taza looked at her, his eyes hard but not unkind. "Then I die with truth." "What truth?" she asked, her voice fading. "That life is not who we are born to. White, Apache, soldier, outlaw. Life is what we choose." For a moment she simply looked at him, really looked, and something like peace passed through her expression. As night fell, Taza dragged the dead bandit's gear into a pile. He found food, ammunition, and mercifully a half-full canteen. He returned to Elena, gave her water, and built a small fire behind a ridge to keep them hidden. Under the glow of the flames, she seemed softer, almost peaceful. "Taza," she said faintly, "when we reach the fort, tell them I wasn't afraid." "You tell them," he replied gently. She smiled, her lips trembling. "I might not make it." "You will," he said firmly, though doubt gnawed at him. She reached out weakly, touching his hand. "You're not what they said you were. You're not a savage." He looked away, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "Maybe not. But the world will never see different." The next morning they continued their journey through the pass. The air grew cooler as they neared the northern edge, where the land opened into the plains below. The outskirts of Fort Stanton. From a high ridge, Taza could see the distant outline of the fort's walls glinting in the sunlight. Soldiers moved like ants near the gates. They were close now. Elena's breathing was shallow, her strength nearly gone. He knew she might not last another night. The time for hiding was over. He took a deep breath, gripping the reins tighter. "We go," he said softly. Every step toward that fort felt heavier than the last. Each mile was a reckoning, not just with the soldiers waiting below, but with everything he had done to reach this point. The arrow he shouldn't have pulled. The life he had fought to save. The blood on his own hands. By dusk, they reached the last ridge before the open plain. Beyond it lay the fort, safety for her, judgment for him. As the sun set in red fire across the desert, Taza knew the next dawn would decide everything. Her fate, his freedom, and the meaning of mercy in a land that offered none. The dawn came quietly over the plains. A pale gold light crept across the hills, touching the dust, the cacti, and the two figures riding slowly toward Fort Stanton. The air was still, heavy with the kind of silence that comes before change. Taza rode straight-backed, his eyes fixed on the fort ahead. Elena leaned weakly against him, her face ashen, her body trembling with fever. Her strength was nearly gone, but she still clung to the reins as if holding on meant something. To him, to herself, to the promise he had made. From the ridge above the fort, they could see the distant movement of soldiers. The white walls of the compound gleamed against the desert. Smoke rose from the chimneys. Bugles echoed faintly in the morning air. Civilization, or what passed for it in this harsh country, stood before them. Taza stopped his horse. The last stretch of land was open, exposed, a killing ground if the soldiers mistook him for a raider. He knew what they would see, an Apache on horseback carrying a wounded white woman. No explanation, no mercy, only bullets. He looked down at Elena. "We near the fort," he said quietly. "You tell them I help." She shook her head weakly. "They won't listen." "Then maybe they listen to truth," he replied, her eyes filled with tears. "Don't go with me, please. If they see you, they'll kill you." He hesitated. Part of him wanted to listen. He could leave her at the edge of the river, ride back into the hills and disappear like smoke. No one would ever know, but his heart would, and so would hers. He reached into his pouch and took out something, the arrowhead he had pulled from her body days ago. The metal was blackened, rusted at the tip. "This began it," he said, placing it in her hand. "You live, it means I was forgiven." She looked at it, then back at him. "You don't need forgiveness." He gave a faint, sad smile. "We all do." Then, without another word, he spurred the horse forward. The descent into the valley was quick. Dust rose behind them. The guards at the fort spotted them almost instantly. Within moments, shouts echoed and rifles were raised along the wall. "Halt! Identify yourself!" a voice called. Taza slowed but didn't stop. "She hurt," he shouted, pointing to Elena. "Need doctor!" The soldiers didn't understand or didn't care. One fired a warning shot that kicked up dirt near his horse. Taza, Elena began, but her words broke into a cough. He held tight to her. Hold on! Another shot rang out. This one grazed his shoulder, spinning him slightly in the saddle. He didn't stop. He rode harder, shouting again, Help her, please. At the gates, a figure stepped forward. Colonel Briggs, the commanding officer. A broad man with a gray beard and cold eyes. He recognized the woman instantly. Elena, he barked. Lower your weapons. The rifles dropped. Men rushed forward. Two soldiers grabbed the horse's reins and helped her down. She nearly collapsed into their arms, blood staining her dress again. Easy now, one said. Briggs looked up at Taza, his hand resting on his revolver. You, off the horse, savage! Taza slid down slowly, his hands raised, showing he meant no harm. The soldiers surrounded him instantly. One kicked his rifle away. Another shoved him to his knees. He saved me, Elena gasped out, clutching at Briggs's arm. He saved my life. Briggs ignored her for a moment, glaring at Taza. You expect me to believe that? He could have left me, she cried. He didn't. He brought me here. Something in her voice, desperate, pleading, made the colonel hesitate. He looked from her pale face to the wounded Apache kneeling in the dirt. Why'd you do it? Briggs asked Taza. Why bring her here? Taza looked up, his voice low and steady. Because I pulled the arrow. My hand made her bleed. My heart said fix it. Briggs stared at him for a long moment, jaw tight. Then he barked an order. Take him to the holding cells. Get the surgeon for her. Elena tried to protest, but the soldiers led her away toward the infirmary. Taza didn't resist as they bound his wrists and pushed him inside the fort. Hours passed. He sat in a dim cell, his shoulder throbbing, his mind strangely quiet. Outside, he could hear the steady rhythm of boots, the crackle of campfires, the distant whinny of horses. Near sunset, the cell door creaked open. Colonel Briggs entered. He stood there for a while, studying Taza in silence. She's alive, he said finally. The surgeon says she'll recover. Taza nodded once. Relief showed only faintly in his eyes. Briggs sighed, rubbing his chin. She told me everything. About the ambush. About you saving her. She swore you were no enemy. The colonel paused, then added quietly, You could have left her. Every reason to. But you didn't. I can't make sense of that. Taza looked up, his voice calm. You think Apache got no heart. Maybe that's your mistake. Briggs said nothing for a long time. Then he stepped forward and unlocked the cell. Get out, he said. Before I change my mind. Taza rose slowly, uncertain. You've got till dawn, Briggs said. After that I can't protect you. There's men here who'd hang you just for breathing. Taza nodded. You protect her. That enough. He left quietly that night. No one saw him ride out. Just a shadow crossing the desert under a sky full of stars. When Elena woke days later, weak but alive, she found something beside her bed, the black arrowhead wrapped in a scrap of cloth. A note was tied around it, written in careful, broken English. You live. That is enough. Taza, she wept softly, holding it to her chest. Years later, people still spoke of the Apache who rode into Fort Stanton with a dying white woman in his arms, who could have fled but chose mercy instead. Some called him a fool. Others called him a ghost. But those who remembered the story, those who saw the humanity beneath the dust and hate, said something different. That in a land built on blood, one man's act of compassion was worth more than 100 bullets. And somewhere, across the wide and endless desert, the wind still carried his name, Taza, the warrior who chose mercy over vengeance, and in doing so, changed both their fates forever.